Why is it that some technical presentations and pitches get a great reception, but some of them fall flat? Well, there are many reasons for this, but one of the biggest is a lack of relatability. So in this video, I'm going to explain what relatability is and how you can use relatability to connect with more people. There's a brilliant scene in the film The Theory of Everything, where Stephen Hawking's wife, Jane, explains the conflict between the two main pillars of physics. Rather than diving into technical details, she makes use of props on the dinner table.
The two great pillars of physics are quantum theory, the laws that govern the very small particles, electrons and so on, and general relativity.
Yes, Einstein.
Einstein's theory, the laws that govern the very large planets and such.
The problem is that whilst these two theories work very well independently, when you try to get them to play together,
well, then it all goes a little... yes, haywire. Just all becomes a godless mess.
Oh dear.
This scene is brilliant because even a small child can relate to and understand this basic idea. The peas won't play with the potatoes. And this brings us to today's topic, relatability. So what is relatability? Relatability is all about whether your audience can see themselves or something they know in what you're saying. So a relatable character has traits that remind the audience of themselves in one or more ways. A relatable location reminds them of a familiar environment, and so on. This relatability relationship doesn't have to be direct. We can relate to cartoon characters and other completely fictional figures, landscapes, and situations if the portrayal is well executed. The main thing is that we have something in common or something familiar to grab hold of. The same goes for technical presentations and pitches. You can pitch the wildest tech in the world and get a fantastic reception if it is relatable to your audience. The problem is that many technical presentations and pitches are framed in technical language and concepts that only make sense to the person presenting or perhaps to a few other specialists. If you're making such a presentation, you need to create a bridge from your world to the audience's world by highlighting the elements that they have in common. To give a very simple example, let's say you're pitching a traffic monitoring app in London. Then you might use some images of traffic with familiar sights in the background like Big Ben or Buckingham Palace. But if you're pitching in Shanghai, you should swap those images out for local images that speak to a local Shanghai audience. In this example, the conceptual distance from your idea and the world that the audience lives in is very small because for them to see what you're talking about, they just need to look out the window. Things get much more difficult when it comes to making abstract concepts relatable, which is why the Theory of Everything example is so great, boiling down two very difficult ideas into something a 4-year-old can understand. It also makes great use of metaphor and props, substituting subatomic particles for peas and large-scale objects like planets with potatoes. So at a high level, what we're trying to do here is take something abstract, complex, or technical and map it onto something concrete and relatable that you can then tell a story around. The same point applies in teaching and training. If you're trying to teach someone how to code, for instance, you could introduce the concept of an algorithm by describing or eliciting the steps required to brush your teeth or make a sandwich. Both of those activities are highly relatable to everyone. Now you might be thinking that this process of making things relatable involves dumbing down your ideas, and I totally get that. But keep in mind that if you lose someone at the beginning, it can be very hard to get them back. Also, if you're presenting to an expert audience, you can always speed up and get into the juicy advanced stuff if they are quick on the uptake and if that's what they actually need. So as a general rule, it's helpful to think about how you can introduce abstract ideas by translating them into something visual, tangible, and concrete, which is familiar to everyone. This then provides a solid basis for abstraction, elaboration, and adding of technical detail later on. There's a second aspect to the translation process, which is to translate concepts into some form of practical meaning or application. As a boy, the great physicist Richard Feynman's dad used to read to him from the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is a pretty weird thing to do for your child, but the child ended up winning the Nobel Prize, so who am I to judge? Feynman's dad would pause every so often to translate the knowledge into examples of how it could be applied. So they might read that a brontosaurus was 25 feet high with a 6-foot wide head. And one practical application or consequence of this knowledge would be that if the brontosaurus was standing in their front yard, it would be tall enough to see through the top floor windows, but it couldn't put its head through the window because its head was too wide. So we can see relatability as applicability. This applicability can be practical, meaning it's something we know we can do now, or it could be theoretical. For example, we can talk about traveling through wormholes at the edge of the galaxy, but that doesn't actually mean that we could do it in reality or with our current level of technology. The point is that thinking this way brings the knowledge to life, which makes it more memorable and actionable. If you're trying to raise investment to build something completely new, then this type of thinking is particularly valuable. Finally, here's an interesting example of an unusual application, a kind of reverse application of these ideas. When the mathematician Andrew Wiles was trying to prove Fermat's last theorem, which had been puzzling mathematicians for hundreds of years, he needed to test his ideas on someone without anyone else suspecting what he was up to, as he really wanted to keep his work a secret until he was absolutely sure that he'd solved the problem. So he disguised his proof as a series of lectures for postgraduates, which one of his trusted colleagues, Nick Katz, could attend. He didn't explain to anyone apart from Katz what the course was for. It was completely unrelatable to anything that they would have been familiar with, making it impossible for anyone other than Katz to follow and understand. After a few weeks, Katz was the only one left in the audience because everyone else had got totally lost and given up.
None of the graduate students knew, and in a few weeks they just drifted off because it's impossible to follow stuff if you don't know what it's for, pretty much. It's pretty hard even if you do know what it's for, but after a few weeks, I was the only guy in the audience.
In other words, Wiles deliberately excluded people by making the ideas unrelatable. So relatability goes hand in hand with knowing your audience. If you know your audience, it will be easier for you to relate to them and use relatable language, examples, images, and so on. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. If you like this video, please give it a like, give it a share, and consider subscribing because I'm going to be making a lot more videos like this in the very near future.